Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're talking about KPIs, Key Performance Indicators. We all use them to figure out if we're winning or losing. But what if the very things we're measuring are actually pushing us in the wrong direction? We're going to dive into how to make these things work for you, not against you.
Yeah, I know. What on earth could venomous snakes teach you about business strategy? It sounds crazy, right? But stick with me, because this story reveals a huge trap that so many companies fall into with their KPIs. And trust me, the consequences can be pretty venomous themselves.
This all brings us to a really famous story from history. It's a perfect cautionary tale, really, about what happens when good intentions go horribly wrong. It's called the Cobra effect.
So picture this. The government is dealing with a massive Cobra problem. Their solution? Seemed brilliant, really. Super straightforward. They offer to pay a cash bounty for every single dead Cobra. Simple, right? What could possibly go wrong? And, at first, it was a huge success. People were totally motivated, they started hunting cobras, and the snake population started to shrink. But then things got weird. As wild cobras got harder to find, some enterprising locals, they found a new way to keep the cash flowing. You heard that, right? They started breeding cobras, just to kill them and collect the bounty. So of course, when the government found out about this scheme, they shut the whole program down. But now the breeders were stuck with all these snakes that were suddenly worthless. What did they do? They just let them go.
And the result? An absolute disaster. The city ended up with more wild cobras than they had when they started, all because they measured the wrong thing. And that is the absolute crux of the issue.
Look, the Cobra effect isn't just some funny story from the past. It's a perfect metaphor for how a lot of businesses mess up their KPIs. We get so laser-focused on hitting a number that we totally lose sight of what we were actually trying to achieve. KPI expert Bernie Smith puts it perfectly. He says metrics often become this, quote, unloved stepchild of the business. And why is that? It's because most of the time, the company itself isn't totally 100% clear on what its real goals are to begin with. So let's back up. A KPI doesn't have to be this big, scary corporate thing. It's really simple. It's just a way to measure something you care about. If you're trying to lose weight, stepping on the scale, that's a personal KPI. If your business cares about profit, well, that's your KPI. It's just a number that tells you if you're on the right track. And this is exactly where the Cobra story went off the rails. The government's KPI was number of dead cobras, but their real goal, the outcome they actually wanted, was a lower population of live cobras. See the difference? It's a tiny shift in words, but it led to a massive, disastrous outcome. So, it all comes down to this. A good KPI starts with knowing what you really, truly want to achieve. That's the first step, always. But okay, how do you get from that big, fuzzy idea to something you can actually measure? Well, there's a really simple framework for that. All right, so how do you even begin to figure out what to measure? Bernie Smith suggests this really powerful two-step process. It's brilliant because it perfectly balances that creative, blue-sky thinking with what's actually possible in the real world.
He calls it dreamers versus pragmatists. Step 1 is for the dreamers. You get a group together and just brainstorm every possible way you could measure success. No idea is too crazy or too hard. Then step 2 is for the pragmatists. They take that massive, wild list and filter it down to a handful of things you can actually realistically track. A great way to do that first step is with something called a KPI tree. It's a fantastic way to take a huge, vague goal like be healthy, which is impossible to measure, right? And break it down into smaller pieces you can track. Things like calorie intake, how many times you hit the gym, or how many hours you sleep. Okay, so once the dreamers have built this huge tree of ideas, the pragmatists get to work, and they use 2 really simple questions to filter everything. For every single idea on that list, they ask, first, on a scale of 0 to 10, how important is this? And second, on a scale of 0 to 10, how easy is it to measure? Then you just multiply those 2 scores together. What you get is a ranked list. It's so simple but so powerful. Suddenly, you can see clear as day what you should probably focus on first. It takes what could be a really subjective, emotional debate and turns it into a structured, logical conversation. But here's where it gets really interesting. This whole process doesn't just give you a nice, tidy to-do list. It also shines a big, bright spotlight on some of your biggest hidden opportunities. As you're going through and scoring your list, you're going to find some things that are super important but really, really hard to measure. They'll have a low final score, and your first instinct might be to just toss them aside. Don't. Smith calls these your gold bars.
Think about it. These are the huge, critical business questions that are just plain hard to answer. Like, how creditworthy is this person? That's a tough question, but Experian built a whole company on answering it. Or, how relevant is this web page to what I just searched for? Google built an empire on that one. These gold bars are the challenges your competitors are probably ignoring because they're hard. So the real question is, who in your company is trying to figure them out?
Okay, I know this might sound like a lot, but the best part is you don't need fancy software or a team of data scientists to get started. In fact, the most powerful first step you can take is surprisingly simple and low-tech. Bernie Smith is a huge fan of just starting with a whiteboard. He says there's something almost magical about having your team physically get up, walk to the board, and write down the results. It's old school, but it has a huge impact.
I mean, there's just so much to be said for taking a simple approach. As he says, all we need is a pen and a board and go for it. There's no barrier to entry. It's visual, everyone can see it, and it gets the whole team invested in the numbers right from day one. It just makes the data feel real.
So when you boil it all down, what's the big takeaway here? It's that setting good KPIs isn't really a math problem, it's a communication problem. It's about getting the right people in a room to have an honest conversation about what winning actually looks like for you. So here's my question for you. What is the one conversation about performance your team